Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of Sapient Thoughts, where we discuss theophilosophical issues, where we answer the detractors of Islam and their arguments, in addition to making our own arguments for the veracity of Islam. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about a verse which is littered all over these kind of anti-Islamic websites. This is in chapter 86, verse number 7, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانِ مِمَّا خُلِقَ مِنْ مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ يَخْرُجُ مِنْ بَيْنِ الصُّلْبِ وَالتَّرَائِبِ. That let human beings see where he has been, from what he has been created. He has been created from a secreted or a gushing fluid that comes from, or that he comes from, and we'll talk about the differences in translation. بَيْنِ الصُّلْبِ وَالتَّرَائِبِ, between the backbone and the ribs. And obviously here, صُلْبُ التَّرَائِبِ is translated in more than one way, and we'll come to this. The contention is that this is actually unscientific, because we know that spermiogenesis happens in the testicles and it doesn't happen between the backbones in the ribs, for example. And the assumption obviously is that what is being referred to in the verse when it says ma'in dafiq is sperm, and therefore this verse is out of line with observable reality and it's a proof against Islam. This is the contention. So let's deal with one thing at a time. First and foremost, what does the words sulb and tara'ib actually mean? So there are three opinions which are represented in the classical literature and the dictionaries. Either we're talking about the backbone and the ribs of the man, or we're talking about the backbones of the ribs and the backbones of the man and the ribs of the woman, or we're talking about the backbone and the ribs of the woman, and we're not talking about the secreted liquid or the secreted fluids, but instead we're talking about the insan, the human being himself. Because the verse says, فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانِ مَا خُلِقَ, let the human being see from which, or from that which he has been created. خُلِقَ مِنْ مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ, he has been created from a gushing or secreted fluid. يَخْرُجُ مِنْ بَيْنِ الصُّلْبِ وَالتَّرَائِبِ, which comes from between the backbone and the ribs. Now, could it mean that the human being, يعني فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانِ مِمَّا خُلِقَ, let the human being see where he is being created from. خُلِقَ مِنْ مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ, and taqdeer here is خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ, that the insan was created from ماء دافق, secreted fluid. يخرج الإنسان يعني من بين الصلب والترائب, that the insan, it comes from بين الصلب والترائب. So the opinion that says the classical apologetical approach or apologetics approach, for those who take the view that it's talking about من بين الصلب والترائب, the backbone and the ribs of the man, is to say, well, actually this is saying ماء دافق, it's saying secreted fluid, it's talking about gushing fluid. And we know that yes, spermiogenesis happens in the testes, but it goes up the epididymis, and actually there is something called seminal vesicle, and it collects seminal fluids from there, and it comes back down the urethra, and then when ejaculation happens, what then takes place is obviously the emission happens. And so the seminal fluids, right, the seminal fluids are collected from either the seminal vesicles and or the prostate. That's opinion one. And so they say that بين الصلب والترائب here is anything above the coccyx and what's parallel to it, because the coccyx, or عجب الذنب in the Arabic language, is where the backbone ends. بين الصلب والترائب, between the backbone and the ribs, so that the backbone ends at the عجب الذنب or the coccyx. So every part of the intersection there, and that means to say, from a human reproductive perspective, that anything which is above the penis, because the penis is parallel to, from an anatomical perspective, to the coccyx, and we know that the seminal vesicles, and we know that also the prostate is above the penis. And so they say this is, in fact, Maurice Bucquois in his famously said this is a scientific miracle of the Quran. But we're not going down that route. We're just saying this is one apologetic approach of answering the question. And it may be satisfactory to some, it may not be satisfactory to others. And the language actually is facilitative of that. Now, the second approach, where we say that it's talking about the backbone of the man and the ribs of the woman, they say this is talking about oogenesis. Because oogenesis happens in the ovaries of the woman, and this is where the eggs are basically being formed. And so that happens above once again, the vagina, which is parallel to the coccyx. And so the same kind of argument is made. And they say, so this is talking about the fluids, because there's a fluid that carries either the egg or the sperm for both man and woman. And so they say this is not talking about, because the Arabic word nutfa is not used here. No, nutfa is categorized as qillatun min ma', a minute quantity of liquid. But the phraseology used here is ma'in dafiq, a gushing secreted fluid. So someone would notice the differentiation between the two kinds of words that are used. That's the first thing that is said. So yes, this is one approach, the other approach. But one other approach which has not been highlighted as much, which also has classical precedent, and is mentioned by Ibn Atiyah in his tafsir, and also by Al-Qurtubi in his, as one of two main opinions that he mentions in this verse, is that this is not talking about the secreted fluid at all. It's talking about the insan. Because it says, فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانِ مِمَّا خُلِقَ, let the human being see what he was created from. خُلِقَ مِنْ مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ, يعني خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ, the human being was created from a secreted fluid. يَخْرُجُ مِنْ بَيْنِ الصُّلْبِ وَالتَّرَائِبِ, he says, تَقْدِيرُهُ, what is understood in the language here, and the subtext is that يخرج الإنسان من بين الصلب والترائب, that the human being comes from بين الصلب والترائب, and this is talking about pregnancy and birth. And this would be completely uncontroversial, because obviously the baby is in the intersection between the backbone and the ribs of the woman. And so these are three very legitimate ways to answer the question, and three very acceptable things. No one can really, especially with the third opinion, I see no way anyone can say that's against observable reality. And therefore, to try and use this verse to indicate that only sperm, which by the way, the word sperm is not mentioned in the scientific senses in the Quran, al-haywan al-manawi, which the Arabs have now invented and put into biological textbooks, is created between the backbones and the ribs. This is ignorance, and it's not a comprehensive understanding of the Quranic discourse. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.